Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing my experience of working in the United States of America and comparing it to working in Canada, in particular in the major cities and in particular in tech. I received a comment asking me if I can do a video on whether it was worth it moving to the US from Canada and if healthcare, taxes, crime, etc. made it worth it. So I'm going to talk about that. To give appropriate context, I've grown up in Vancouver, Canada for the majority of my life. I've worked, went to school here. I also lived in Toronto for 4 months when I did an internship at a tech company there. So those were the two major cities in Canada that I lived and worked at. If you're a Canadian, you kind of grew up consuming a lot of US media, and they really glamorize their cities like New York City, or if you're in tech, working in Silicon Valley or in San Francisco. So you have this, I guess, urge or motivation to go and experience all of that. This is what happened to me. I was like, I want to go live in San Francisco and work for a tech company. That's like the ultimate goal. And eventually I did achieve that, convinced my company to offer me a visa and do an intra-company transfer. So I moved straight into the belly of the beast, San Francisco. This was 2022, so it was post-COVID, but the remnants of COVID were still present in the city. So this has influenced my experience of the city, so keep that in mind. And this goes without saying that all of this is my own biased perspective on things, and it's against my set of beliefs and values or views of the world, and someone else obviously can have a completely different experience of these things. If you disagree with me, I don't care. This is my experience of it, and you can't alter my experience. But if you have a different experience, do share it so that people have a balanced perspective, but don't attack my opinions on it. So I lived in San Francisco from June of 2022 until September of 2022. So I lived there for a few months, not a complete year. And then I lived in New York for 2 months. And then I lived in Miami for a month. I guess the biggest thing you will notice when you move from Canada to the US is that there's a drastic bump in pay. In my company, and I think this is a standard for most big or average sized tech companies or medium sized tech companies, my pay went up 30%. Second, cost of things, obviously in places like San Francisco, New York, Miami, because you're paying in American currency, it is more. So I don't know, maybe the 30% bump offsets it. But in general, yeah, you're making way more money than you would be in Canada. Healthcare wise, I'm just going based on the notes. I'm using the outline that this comment provided because it saves me work. Healthcare wise, I'm a young person. My company had healthcare. I never had to use it. So no experience there. Taxes, Canada has more taxes than the US, even in places like California and New York, which have like really high tax rates comparatively to other places in the US. I think Canada overall still taxes more. So again, economically, you're better off working in the US. Crime. So San Francisco was like the most sketchy area I've lived in. I lived in multiple neighborhoods in San Francisco, so I feel like it wasn't that I have a biased perspective because I lived in one particular area. I lived in Soma. And then I lived also in Russian Hill, close to like North Beach. Out of those neighborhoods, I think Russian Hill was my favorite. There is a great like disparity of, I guess, like you always have to use such careful words when talking about these things. There's a disparity of experience in the type of people you see in these different neighborhoods in San Francisco. But in general, I would say like my entire experience of there was anxiety. Like I was always anxious. And since this was like pretty recently post-COVID, there wasn't a lot of people. I remember there was once a Salesforce conference and it was actually packed with people and it was really pleasant, but that wasn't the normal experience. I think San Francisco might be getting busier or has gone busier now, but back when I was there, it wasn't very busy. I would have to constantly be on the lookout and like cross the street because people's behaviors there were unpredictable. Like you literally could not predict what a person would do. I remember like my first few days in San Francisco, I got onto the bus, it was like a short bus ride I would sometimes take to go to the office from Soma to the financial district, and someone just came in to the bus while I was sitting there and he was like, "I'm gonna kill you," but then he walked out, right? Another experience was near the mall. I forgot what, Westfield Mall. That is also an area that a lot of stuff is going on. But I just remember there was this like completely naked man just waving his thing around and people were just like walking by like it was no big deal. And then I also observed someone intentionally hitting someone else with a scooter, like literally running into a person that was just walking by, completely intentionally, but also they were on a substance. And what else? I guess I was really careful. I'm a really cautious person in the first place. But the entire experience of it and the expense of living in that city, like, it didn't make sense to me why one would pay such a high premium to live in a place where you're constantly on the edge. I understand people are accustomed to it now, like, you just kind of have to accept that if you own a car that the window will be bashed in at some point, and that's just a part and parcel of living in a place like that. But I think if we take a step back, we realize how bizarre it is. So anyhow, that was my experience of San Francisco. Never living there again. Would visit, I guess. And I have friends. I have a friend who's from Germany who lives in San Francisco and has been for a few years now, and he loves it. Mainly for the group of people that that city attracts and for like the startup and entrepreneurial spirit in those people. And he's a man, so maybe that changes the experience of it. But yeah, I don't know, like see what other people say about the city. That was my experience of it. After that, I went to New York, and New York was immediately a better experience in terms of not being on the edge and safety. So New York, I did live only in one area, which was in Manhattan, and it was Gramercy. New York, there's always people around. It's busy, and there is lots of different types of people, but there's so much people that you kind of take comfort in that safety of the crowd. Whereas San Francisco, like I said, it was really desolate when I was there. People really didn't go to the offices. Downtown wasn't that busy, so I felt less safe. But New York, like, you know, people are out all the time and there's so many people. So while there is different types of people, it's not just a dominance of one type of people. So I enjoyed New York in terms of that. And then, let's see, did New York live up to all my sitcom expectations of what it would be like to live in New York City? I would say that I think you need a particular personality for New York to work for you, and I didn't have that personality. So I personally wouldn't live in New York. I just didn't know what to do. I wasn't into the subcultures that are like prevalent in New York for my age group. So all I really did in New York was just like go to the different equinoxes there. So just focus on like my wellness and fitness. And pretty much that's it. I went out to eat a few times with friends and things like that. So I think the city is way too busy for me. There's lots of people, but no one's really connected to each other. So you can actually feel quite lonely if you don't find your like community and subculture. And I guess I didn't have the mentality of forming those relationships when I was there. So I wouldn't live in New York for, just like not a mesh with my personality. And then my third experience was Miami. I freaking loved Miami for multiple reasons. One, the freaking weather. I was there during December, most of December, and it was sunny. The weather, the environment, just being around water and sand is so relaxing. It's literally like the pinnacle of living life to, I don't know, to its extreme pleasantness and satisfaction. 3, people are way more laid back, and maybe this is due to the environmental factor of the water and beach and waves being close by and the good weather. People are really laid back, so that means that they're way more open, and like, you know, if you go into an elevator, people usually smile. So they have time to like chill, because most people that are in Miami have kind of made it, so they're comfortable with who they are. At least that was my impression. I might be wrong, I don't know. There's also many different like elements or subgenres of Miami life, and mine was like the really relaxed version where I would just go to the beach and say hi to my neighbors. And then like, yeah, safety wise it was great too. And there's always something to do with regards to like tech or areas of interest that I had in Miami. It was just so much easier to find things to do. So yeah, if I were able to compose a life and money wasn't a factor, I would have a house in Miami and I would have a house in somewhere close to my family, and I would spend my winters in Miami. It's just like a paradise, essentially, like a vacation spot. So after Miami, I went to Jacksonville. That's where my family gathered for Christmas. And then I actually left the United States because I didn't work anymore and visa and whatever. So my experience of the US was short, but I feel like I got to experience the cities that I wanted to. So overall, I feel like I have scratched that itch I had as a Canadian living across the border and kind of like peering into what it's like to live in the US. And I actually don't have a desire to really go there. The only reason I would want to move back to the US, and I actually do want to move for this reason, is because of the weather. I would love to be somewhere hot and sunny like Southern California, while still being in like a predominantly English speaking Western culture. But otherwise, a lot of it is glamorization, and cities like Vancouver and Toronto are not that much different from those US cities that I lived in. And I don't know if this is true, but from my own experience and most people I know that go to the US on a TN visa, they eventually return back because it isn't that different from Vancouver and Toronto. So overall, is it worth it to go and like live and work in the US? I think everyone should actually experience it. I don't think it's, like I said, that different. But I think if you don't experience it, you always kind of imagine like what it would be like. So if you really have that itch of like going out and like living your full Seinfeld fantasy of like living in New York City or Gossip Girl, just go do it, experience it. But I'm pretty sure you're going to return back at the end because it's not that different from living here. And most of us spend our days in a daily routine. We don't really take like that much advantage of our environments. We just kind of go to our apartments, stare at our laptops to do our work, and see our friends or family. So it doesn't really matter where you really live, I think, as long as like you're in a major city with things that are accessible that you need in your whatever lifestyle. So I hope that answers your question, random commenter about my experience of living in the US versus Canada. I guess I didn't take a hard stance on it. I think, no, my conclusion is that it's actually not that very different from living in a major city in Canada. But you ought to do it. Why not? If you have an opportunity, go live out there, live your American best life, and then come back to Canada and be like, wasn't that great? Thanks for watching.